those are things we'll take into consideration. And then the number 10 related to incumbency, trying to avoid situations where there's multiple trustees in a single area. And then finally, number 11, other criteria that you all think are important and that we should be taking into account as we prepare our maps and our scenarios. So quickly, I would like to just share with you the 2010 census data and how that plays out for your district. Again, this is now over 10 years old, so we expect there will be changes. We're should have had that data towards the beginning of the year, and has consistently been delayed. So we look to get that information in late August or September, the most up-to-date timing. What you'll see here is not only the total population of the district's voters, but we've also listed those that are age 18 and over and presumably able to vote. It breaks this down by the various ethnic categories, and those are in the table for your reference. There's also a map on the left-hand side that shows the city boundaries within the district and some of the major roads that are named after as well. One thing that is available at this time is the 2020 population estimate from the census. What we're waiting for is we're waiting for finer detail at the census block level so that we can do our analysis. And we were able to get this information from a third-party provider that shows what they believe the change in population is over the last 10 years, so comparing 2010 to an estimate of what 2020 would be. We've taken that into our mapping system and compared the population changes, and the map reflects those areas, those census blocks that have grown or declined during that period of time. The darker blue, almost black color represents those areas that have grown the most, and those areas that are kind of a dark red or maroon color are those areas that have declined. You'll see that it's really spread out over the district, and there's growth and decline all over there. All told, the estimated population change is about 10,500, which is about 3% of the district's total population. We also have the citizen voting age population that's provided by the American Communities Survey. We've plotted that here, and this breaks down what we've done is we've layered on the largest ethnic group other than white is the Hispanic Latino group, and it shows the concentration of residents within the district that are part of the citizen voting age population, those that would be eligible to vote in elections. Again, you'll see that in the beige, or excuse me, in the dark brown colors are the areas that have higher concentrations of Hispanic Latino voting age residents, and those that are white or tend to be a little bit more of the light brown color, where there's less concentration. So this brings us to the question of how should the lines be drawn. So I'd like to talk to you or talk you through some of the different considerations and some of the ways that we can take your input and feedback and translate that into the maps and the scenarios that we create. An example of the type of feedback would be talking about certain neighborhoods or certain communities that based on those connections between those communities should be kept together, and it makes sense for them to be in the same trustee area. Beyond that, What's helpful for us is more specific information. Again, when we're just looking at a map or we're looking at the topographic features of a district, we may not get the same sense of the various communities, those communities of interest within the district. So for us, it's helpful to get specific directions about the various dividing lines, streets, or freeways, roadways, and things like that. With the primary rationale being that it helps keep communities together because we're trying to avoid splitting various communities, and that it provides good representation to those within the community. Another example might be that each elementary school boundary should be either within the same trustee area or it should be split. Some of the feedback that we hear is that when you go from voting at large to voting by trustee area, there's a concern that there will be favoritism played and that certain schools may get more support from various board members. So if you decide to put those into multiple areas, perhaps that we'll deal with that. But I think those are very school district specific, and your individual circumstances would help guide us. Again, I think that just going back to the rationale, our hope is that when we apply those criteria, at the end of the day, it helps keep communities together, that provides better representation. Just to quickly touch on the next step. So after tonight and conducting the second public hearing on the pre-maps, the draft criteria resolution is before you. Once you adopt that resolution and any associated changes, we'll take that and begin our map making process. Again, we ran through all of those multiple criteria to come back to you with various scenarios that you can start to review and parse and see what you do like or that you don't like about those scenarios that we created. So that's really the next step. And then after that point, the current schedule shows holding 2 public hearings on those draft scenarios with the goal of adopting the map at the July 27th board meeting. Questions for you?
Thank you for the presentation. We're going to do one round of questions here with my colleagues, then we will hear all public comment, and then if necessary, we'll return back to the dais. Thank you for the presentation. I'll turn to my colleagues for any questions. Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you. I don't have a question, I have a comment. Is that okay? Okay. Well, I'll go first then. First of all, welcome everybody. Appreciate you being here. I would like to make a comment, and then I will share some information that I've been working on for a while. It is my hope as we begin this process to either move to 7 or stay at 5, and we do so by focusing on all the important factors within our school district. I am not proposing that we move to 7 or stay at 5 at this moment. We have often heard from some that a district of our size should have 7 board members, as 6 of the largest school districts in California have 7 board members. This is based on the 10 largest school districts in the state, according to the California Department of Ed, based on student population. I began to compare our district with these 6 districts to see if I could find a size correlation that exists between 7 versus 5, and not based on student population. So please look at my very non-scientific chart. It is correct that 6 of the largest school districts in California have 7 board members. We are number 10, according to the Department of Ed. Again, this figure is based on student population using 2019 and 2020 numbers. And this is how I process this information. Maybe districts that have 7 members could be because of the sheer land size or mass of that district. Example, LA Unified has 720 square miles within their district boundaries, 103 square miles per board member. We have 77 total as a district, so 15 square miles per board member. So let's look at one in our county, in the top 10, which is Elk Unified, which also has 7 board members. They are 5 times bigger than us. Each board member in Elk Grove represents 47 square miles compared to our 15 per board member. Only Fresno Unified has a smaller landmass than us in the top 10 schools in the state. I then focused on the 7 board members. I then focused on having 7 board members if it helps you be more efficient as a district. With the help of our former CFO, Mr. Stevens, we got some financial history of all the 10 districts on the list. There are many factors determining how well a district is run, but usually the manner in which a district handles their finances or budget is a good indicator. Without a healthy budget, you lose programs and teachers. We have another school district in our county, not in the top 10, but very similar to us. They're having major financial and district problems. They also have 7 board members. So using this list, 2 of the 6 largest school districts with 7 board members have had a positive certification over the last 3 years. Compare that to the 4 districts that have 5 board members in the top 10 districts. 3 of the 4 have had a positive certification over the last 3 years. I share this information for you trying to make a point that as we discussed to move to 7 or stay at 5, that we stay focused on the important factors within our district. To state that we should be at 7 or 5 because of other districts, for whatever reason, is not in the best interest of our district, in my opinion. Again, I am not proposing that we move to 7 or stay at 5. I look forward to hearing all the parties involved to help us make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Ms. Costa.
Mr. Hernandez, that's amazing. Great research. I'm very impressed. And it's information that actually CSBA couldn't get for us. So isn't it interesting that one of our own board members got it? So thank you. Also, welcome to everybody. I'm really grateful that we're back in person for board meetings and that the governor's order has been rescinded. It means that we're moving back to life as it was pre-COVID, which has been our intention since we started the process, and our intention for our students to be back in person in the fall. I really have appreciated all of the communication and feedback from many community members who called me and emailed me. I agree with the criteria in Resolution 3059. I have one addition, and that addition would be that each trustee district should have a minimum of 1 high school or more. I would really like to encourage the public who is listening to this broadcast on YouTube and the public that's in the audience to come on either Wednesday the 14th, it's July 14th from 6:30 to 8 at either Dyer Kelly, Casa Roble, or Mira Loma, or on Thursday, July 15th at Greer, Mesa Verde, or the district office. Your feedback is important. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. Either send in your comments if you're watching on YouTube, or in person and come to the community forums. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. Ms. Creason.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. I want to be sure that you get what you need from us in community tonight. So what exactly do you need to walk away with?
I think looking at the criteria resolution and affirming that those are all things that are important to the board. In addition, looking at high school attendance boundaries or high schools, those types of things are certainly helpful for us. And then perhaps after the public hearing, and there's other folks from the community that have good ideas as you discuss those, and think, yeah, that's something we should really account for. We hadn't thought of that. That's the kind of input that's really helpful for our firm in drawing maps that really reflect what you want.
Got it. Thank you. That's really helpful. I know the one thing I do want to hear from the comment before I go too far into this, the one thing that really stood out that really unsettles me is the protection of incumbency. It's my vote. I would vote on that right now that we shouldn't do that. That shouldn't be a criteria at all. But I would love to get through the process, and might have more things to share after that, but that's one that really stands out. And then question about census. I do find it really unfortunate that census didn't come out when it was supposed to come out. That really unsettles me, knowing and understanding the great change that has happened in our community over the last 10 years. That said, if it's going to come out this year, does that mean that we're going to be going through this process again before the 2022 election?
Yeah, unfortunately, we will be. I do think that it will be a much more fluid process. We'll have criteria, input, and feedback to be able to go through that quicker. We have a starting point in terms of the map that you'll be, adopting a few weeks from now. I think then we're just making adjustments, and hopefully they're small adjustments. And I think that's what we would be looking to do.
Okay, and then does that change require the same process we're going through now with the 5 hearing? That doesn't happen. Okay, understood. I think that's enough for now. Thank you. Sure.
If I could just make a point process real quick before I call any Dr. McKibben, and that's just, I want my colleagues to know, and I know staff's taking notes as well, but also in the event it's helpful for the public. So in the board packet, you'll see the resolution and the criteria. And so we'll be doing a little bit of active development here. Yeah. And I'm taking notes, like we had a very specific kind of note already about each district should have 1 high school or more, and a specific call out on the lack of a preference for one of the identified criteria, etc. So just like that's the activity for the evening. Yes, Ms. Greason. Sure. And we're going to come back as well.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't acknowledge, I think Pam's idea, Ms. Costa's idea for making sure everyone has a high school also is very, very reasonable. And then I just want to ask a process question. It's my understanding that once maps are actually ready and those go out to community, that those can be tweaked along the way. So it's not like, okay, we're going to make a decision. These are the static, maps. They're not static. They can be changed before it comes to us to vote at the 5th meeting. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Can I build off, because it goes in line with Ms. Priest's question? I was watching a board meeting, actually in Oak Grove the other day, and they were talking about the growth in their district. And it's probably more significant than we've seen, but they were going to try and draw some of the maps, and you said that you have some of that data already. Is that a consideration, that knowing that there's those changes, you could try and do that? And would you identify maybe one map that took that into consideration and one that didn't? How does that work? I don't know.
Yeah, those are great questions. I think we would do that. I think again, when we come back to you, there's going to be multiple scenarios. Those scenarios may favor one of these criteria over another. But to your point, I think that we can come back with one that leaves a little bit more room. We have to be within that 10% threshold, but perhaps in those areas where we know there's growth that has happened, we keep those a little bit smaller in terms of total population, knowing that when we get 2020 census data, we will likely see more residents in those areas. Therefore, when we redo the maps, there will be less adjustments that need to be made. Of course, while we may know total population, at this time, and we can sort of look forward, we still have to go back and look at the ethnic composition and how that's affected. So, but certainly that's something we'll keep in mind.
Dr. McKibben, I both want to thank you for your patience and have you go next. Thank you.
I'd like to go back to slide 6 and ask you a couple of questions. For example, on criteria 2 on that page, it talks about the principles established related to gerrymandering in the Shaw decision. Can you give me a summary of what kinds of things should we be looking out for related to that criteria in terms of gerrymandering? Are we talking about the classic slivers or what did Shaw say basically?
Yeah, I'm stepping a little bit out of my expertise because I'm not your attorney, but in those cases, and I think what we're trying to avoid is those situations where, in accordance with Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, that we're not cracking certain populations or communities of interest in order to dilute their ability to vote, or we're not packing them all. So those are sort of the two standard terms that refer to this, putting them all into one district so as to allow, or again, to limit their ability to influence the outcome of an election.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
In terms on that same page, you talked about the examples of interest in groups like that. Does this only relate to protected classes related to ethnicity, race, and language? Let me give you an example of that, and I don't think it's exactly the right definition, but we have about 13% of our students in this district that have IEPs, individualized educational plans. Those would seem to me logically to be a community of interest, and we ought to be looking to make sure that we don't disadvantage those folks. It appears in this they are not a consideration, or am I incorrect in that?
I can give you the definition from the state constitution. Again, stepping a little bit outside of my expertise, not being an attorney, but what it refers to is a contiguous population with shared social and economic interests. So I'm not sure that would meet that definition, but again, that's my layman's view of it.
Because those are as a percentage of things that are larger than all of those things that are on our maps but one, and it would seem as a board those ought to be something that we ought to think about and so forth. But if they're not part of this process, then they're not part of this process.
Yeah, not sure if I would defer to you on that. Yeah.
My last one has to do with picking up on Ms. Costa's thing. One of the things that I think that is the high school thing is actually correct. I think that perhaps even middle schools would fit into that. But even going further than that, we have various feeder systems within the district, and I think those ought to be at least considered, if not part of the criteria.
And are you referring to the attendance boundaries
Yes.
of the elementary? Yeah, certainly. And we have that data so that we are able to plot that and show you what that looks like in these scenarios and how those would be impacted. So certainly we can incorporate that into our analysis and into our maps.
And finally, one sorry, I cheated almost. In terms of as we look at maps and so forth, and know that if we go to 7, we're going to have approximately 46, and if we can stay at 5, we're going to be approximately 64,000, and so forth. Is there any way to have maps that, particularly of 18 plus voters, that show approximately how many people are in a particular grid section or something like that, or is that too difficult to do?
Just so I'm clear, so to show you a map that has the census blocks and the population that is within those census blocks?
Yes.
Certainly we could provide one of those and do that. At this time, that would be based on the 2010 census or the third-party data provider that I shared with you earlier. So, but yes, we can provide that.
Because I was looking at some of the earlier maps, and it seemed like looked like there was a chunk added to a map, and I was wondering, well, why that was. Was it indeed because that had a family that had 20 kids or something?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So you mean in terms of the map that showed the population change? Got it. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we can show you that, or we can show you the growth.
Generally, also the overall notion of where people are.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McKibben, and thank you as well for the presentation. First, want to kind of clarify a few things. There's been a couple of maps different maps floating around, often with comments suggesting that, you know, we voted them down or haven't considered them or have no intention to adopt a particular map that has been drafted. Can you just clarify for me at this point in the process that there have been no maps for this process that we started in March of?
We have not done any maps at this time. We're waiting for a criteria resolution from you all. That will really set the table for us to do our analysis. So no, there have been no maps created at this time.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
There's also a bit of a narrative that the board refuses to transition to 70s, and this doesn't accompany a question or making a comment. At this point, we have not rolled out anything at all. Where we are at in a process, we're at the front end of a process, and we are at this time establishing our criteria for developing trustee boundaries. We have noted and clarified at various points that the intention is to consider a set of maps that includes 5 trustee areas and a set that includes maps with 7 trustee areas. Can you confirm that that is also your understanding of the discussions that have taken place to date?
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you. This is not off the table, and any narrative that we have refused to consider a certain map or certain seat numbers is likely intended to sow divisiveness and conflict. I'll also comment on, and this I'm kind of in alignment with what Mr. Hernandez said here, which is just this 7 seats are automatically better. I appreciate the research that you brought to the group for consideration. Thank you very much. It's slightly less official than your research, but I did reach out to a couple of scholars and emerging scholars in the field just around, you know, governance and student outcomes. And what do we already know about governance teams and how they impact student outcomes? And emerging evidence demonstrates that school boards may have an influence on student achievement, which is not that surprising. And unsurprisingly, high quality governance tended to have greater student achievement. And while there is not currently specific research on the size of boards impacting student outcomes, we can infer from the research on board quality and responsibility that larger boards are likely to face more difficulties creating policy coherence and strong governance outcomes. So again, we're at the beginning of the process. My interest is hearing community input. That is part of this process. And I thank everyone who's been a part of it thus far. I do have a couple of items that I want to add for consideration. I've said this in prior public settings, but I'll say it again. While it's legally permissible, as you noted in the criteria and the trustee areas, where incumbents currently live is not a priority for me for consideration. And I don't think it's necessary as a formal consideration for map adoption. I care more about seats that represent our communities. I want to echo support for the criteria addition from Ms. Costa around the 1 high school or more per seat. And also just want to clarify, you know, there's a list of things we can offer to you for consideration while we're considering the maps. And then there's kind of our formal criteria list. And so I think this was along the lines of what McKibben was suggesting as well, but throughout the consideration of the maps, I would also like to see information related to both the high schools and the middle schools and the elementary schools that generally matriculate to those schools. I think it'll be helpful information to consider. I'm not sure if that needs to be specifically called out in our criteria. We can have a little bit more discussion about that, but I just wanted to kind of echo that sentiment. And then I just wanted to add a little bit of material that may be helpful when considering some of the maps. And you know, in 2018, I think most folks probably are familiar, but SACP noted that the Art Arcade is the place with the most income inequality in the entire state. And this is according to the U.S. Census Bureau tracks, which measures income inequality using the Gini Index. And granted, it is slightly outdated. There was a 2018 SACP article that was using 2016 data. That being said, given recent events and everything that has transpired since 2016, I can't imagine it's improved, or at least not improved
in any dramatic way. And I just want to note that in 2010, particularly since we'll be at least preliminarily using 2010 census data, there was an incorporation effort that I was briefly a part of at that time, and it very closely looked at the demographics of kind of the Arden Arcade boundary. And at that time, there was 2 maps that were part of that process. One included boundaries that went all the way south to the river, so all the way down. And then one included a map where the southern boundary stopped at Fair Oaks. So it would have carved out, most folks who are part of the community know, it would have carved out a lot of the lots and parcels of Fair Oaks that don't necessarily match the demographics of everything north of that area. So I just offer that in case that background is helpful when considering, because that demographic is very, very, very different. And I know we're talking in pretty broad generalities, but it should be taken into consideration that those communities are not the same. And to the extent that we are considering like neighborhoods, that might be information to consider. I'd be happy to kind of send the old links, the LAFCO analysis that went with that, etc. And then can you just articulate one more time, we've done it a couple of times, but the process after the census, just to make it absolutely clear that like there will be a smaller version, but a 2.0 version of this process.
Yeah, and so again, our best estimate at this time is that we will have the block level census data that we need in order to do this in late August or early September. I think at this time, what we've discussed with your attorneys and has been discussed internally is at least one public hearing at that time. But I think more likely needs to be known about how drastic are those changes, and does it require more of that? I think as this first step in the process concludes and you transition with a map that you've approved, once that wraps up, we'll have a better sense of, okay, this, at that time, I think we can look forward and say that maybe we do need more public hearings, or actually, we addressed most of the major issues. It's hard to know sitting from here, but, and the intention is to wrap that up in December of 2021, January of 2022. You have to have those new voting areas in place by the end of February, so that we can have that those in place for the November 2022 election. Does that make sense? I went through a lot of dates, but yeah, that's the timeline at this point.
It does make sense. I just appreciate the clarification. It's just, again, it's a process. Government isn't always the fastest moving train.
Well, and the reason for that, just to add on one thing, is the reason why it needs to be done so far in advance is in order to give the county registrar time to be able to implement the election. So that's a major reason why. It's not just your district that's affected, there's county agencies as well.
I actually do have one more question. So on slide 6 and 7, there were some enumerated trustee area or trustee considerations, or rather criteria to take into consideration. Can you just give a little bit of background on where that comes from? Does that come from statute? Does that come from prior cases and prior efforts? Just broadly.
Yeah, no, certainly. It comes from not only federal law, but state law. And then some of the others, I think, are also, best practices that districts throughout the state have been doing. But specifically, when it comes to the equal population, that's a federal requirement. Gerrymandering, that's a federal court decision that was made and requires us to be in compliance with. Criteria number 3 related to the Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, not diluting minority influence. And then as far as compact and contiguous, I think those are things that are contained within the State Voting Rights Act, but also really apply to, that's also covered by gerrymandering, right? And compact and contiguous doesn't lead to those strange boundary lines that we were talking about earlier. So some of these crossover as well. And, there are advocacy groups and organizations that have put, have spent a lot of time researching this and how, protected classes have had their voting influence, diluted and impacted. And these are some of the best practices that come from them. So, and I think some of these aren't just applicable to school districts. It's applicable to all local agencies here in California and nationally.
Great. I just appreciate the background on kind of where we got to sort of our starting place for consideration. That's super helpful. I am done, and we're about to move to the public comment.
I was just going to ask you one quick question around following up on her question about gerrymandering. We often see that if a board would say we're not going to protect the incumbency, that makes it much easier to really draw boundaries related to all of the other classifications or identifications. Would that be the case? Because even some maps I've seen from years ago, of which none of these board members were on at the time, you see very edges of individuals and times like that. So in your experience, how does that work?
I think that's probably the case, although I do think there's other situations where you may not have very compact and contiguous areas because you're trying to create opportunity districts or majority minority districts, and that is a requirement of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And so that I think is important to note, that during this process and what was talked about in the presentation, sometimes these criteria are in conflict. And so it's important for us to be able to show you what the possibilities are, and then you can prioritize certain criteria over others. So I do think that's right, though. I do think when you're not thinking about incumbency, that probably frees you up to focus more on the other criteria. And that's how I look at it. Just one thing that I would want to clarify, when I heard you talk about not only high schools and where they're located and also boundaries, for our benefit, it's helpful to know if you mean having the physical location of the high schools within there, or if you're looking to have multiple boundaries. So just keeping that in mind when the criteria resolution is adopted, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I'm actually just going to put a pause on a question here because I think that should be up for discussion. I had one interpretation of it, but it might not be a shared one. So if I can just make a note really quickly. Hopefully I can go read. No. We do have a couple requests to circle back. Mr. Hernandez.
I love everything I've done so far. I do love the middle school feeder program, but I think we have a conflict sometimes. For example, Will Rogers is across the street from Del Campo, but it feeds into San Juan in the whole other city of Citrus Heights. So I think that we would have to take a look at that. I think the intent is good, but we have to understand that that may not be the case in all aspects.
I think we even have some non-boundary schools in our district, so that's unique. And so I think that's a great example that you bring up.
And I just have put a finer point on that. I think that then you have those situations where what takes precedence, communities of interest or school boundaries. And arguably that's a community of interest within the school district, but perhaps not in terms of the definition of the state constitution. So.
Looks like we're going to do one more round. I wanted to see if class if you have anything at the time. Okay, Ms. Priest.
And just to kind of piggyback after what Mr. Hernandez said, another layer that kind of convolutes things is we are an open enrollment district. So a lot of the kids that are in the district or in the boundary don't necessarily go to school in the boundary. So that's something, I know that's not going to be solved by this process, but that's something that this board really needs to think about, the challenges that come from an ultimate open enrollment district.
Doing one last check for any words now. Okay, just a reminder, we will circle back. With that, I declare the topic of the California Voting Rights Act, potential composition of by trustee areas pursuant to Elections Code Section 10010, Subdivision A1, and other applicable provisions of the law prior to the drawing of maps of public hearing, and it is now open for public comment. I'm gonna go ahead and strike it out. We do have public comments at this time, and I'd like to remind the public that comments are limited to 2 minutes, and the clock on the wall will count down the time. As noted at the outset of the meeting, we will begin with individuals who are here with us today to offer public comment, and at the end, we will read those that have been submitted as well. I'm going to read out names based on the order by which folks were signed up. I'll just say in advance, it's based off of our interpretation of a handwritten card, so I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name, but I'm going to do my best. I will announce the individual who should come up and then who is next or on deck. So we're going to start with Tina Gonzalez Casanova, and then on deck is Victoria Castando, that might be Castaneda. Tina, please begin your 2 minutes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tina Gonzalez Casanova, and I am a community member. I've lived in my house down the street for 35 years. I've taught in San Juan for 40. We purchased our home on purpose to live within the district that I work with. I worked in for all the hard work I wanted to go towards my children to benefit that. I wanted to start out by saying that the students in San Juan deserve a board that balances the needs of all the students in the north, the east, the south, and even in the west end. Each board member, as you guys have done in the past, needs to know all of the aspects that's going on within the community in our district. 5 people seems to be a reasonable amount, and has proven in the 40 years that I've taught in San Juan to make decisions that are good for kids. The existing 5-person model demonstrates for students how people make decisions together, holding all the individuals important and precious. I personally believe that we need to keep the 5-person model so that the decisions can continue to be made that are for the most needy and the most urgent decisions. By having way too many people in that, too many cooks in the kitchen, I believe that will muddy up the waters. It's been working, and I'd like us to stay for a 5-person model. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're going to take a short pause while we get our timer. I did have it on my phone, but I couldn't read it, but you were well within the 2 minutes. Thank you for your advice. Something's counting down. Well, I'm happy to also do it on my phone. My concern is that people might not be able to see the time. So I'm trying to find a better way to display it on my phone, but I appreciate that. Can you see this? I'm so sorry. I'm good. Let's go. Let's go. I like that attitude. Start trying to problem solve on the fly. We've got Victoria Castano followed by Ben Avery. Well, thank you.
Clarification, thank you. My name is Victoria Castaneda. Good evening. I'm a small business owner in Arden Arcade, former educator. I have been a homeowner and taxpayer in the district for 30 years. My 2 children are graduates of the district. I was one of the leaders to get a multi-purpose room built at Dale School, elementary school, long time ago. I have served as a vice president of the PTSA at Rio Americano and president of PTSA at El Camino. I have volunteered countless hours in the classroom. I strongly recommend that you implement 7 electoral districts in San Juan. The underserved and marginalized communities of West Arden, Arcade, and Citrus Heights need their own representatives on the school board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Castaneda. We will now go to Ben Avey, followed by Marty Velasco.
Good evening, President, board members, superintendent. It's good to see you all in person. Apologize, I couldn't make it last week, but my colleague Katie Reed, who's here representing the San Juan Parents Association. I come to you tonight to share our support for by-district elections. I think we've shared that before. We are an organization that believes in representation and the ability for parents to fight for their students and put kids first. By-district elections helps us do that. Representation is a key aspect of that. Representation can only come from the individual relationship you have with that board member from your local community. Absent that, you are not going to get the representation that you deserve. We have been fighting for our kids for 12 to 18 months, and I can tell you we have not had as much engagement with the board as we would like. And I think that comes down to representation and the board's ability to interact and communicate with individual families and individual communities. The more representatives you have, the easier it is for them to engage. And that's what elections are about. It is not a performance review. It is about representation and a person's ability to communicate and work with their elected official. Now, I appreciate Mr. Hernandez's research. I too did my own research, and I have a color-coded chart. I took a little bit of a broader look. I looked at the top 25 largest districts by enrollment. Sacramento County has 4. Of those 4, San Juan is the only one that only has 5 trustees. The other have 7. When I took a broader look at the large districts in Northern California, there were 10. Again, San Juan is the only one with 5 trustees. Oakland, San Francisco, Stockton, Clovis, across the district, across Northern California, 7 districts. Why? It makes sense to represent the people you're elected to serve. We urge your support for by-district elections. We appreciate how expeditiously you're moving with them. We do appreciate that. The quicker the better. And we appreciate you moving to 5 or to 7 trustee districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Avey. Next, we have Marty Velasco, followed by Juan Unified.
My name is Maria Velasco. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'd like to speak to you about the move to the by-trustee area elections and whether the district should be a 5 or 7 member board. I'm a school counselor in the district. My children both attended San Juan Unified Schools. I live within the district, so this decision will affect me on many levels. That's why I encourage you to maintain a 5-member board. We have many large districts in California who are run successfully with 5-member boards, and San Juan happens to be one of them. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Over the last few months, I have been increasingly concerned with some of the rhetoric regarding moving to a 7-member board. It seems to be largely led by politicians who ran for school board in the past and lost. And now they're trying to gerrymander our school district for their political ambition. There are several examples of 7-member boards throughout the state and our own county facing financial hardships because their boards cannot work together and fight amongst themselves to represent their own sites. We don't have to look very far. Sac City has 7-member boards and they are in financial crisis. We are not. Twin Rivers has a 7-member board and they have no money to upgrade their schools. Just look around the schools, our own schools, we don't have that problem. We currently have the most diverse school board in San Juan Unified School District. In the last few years, the district has been led with an equity lens. That was needed, and that has
been felt throughout our ranks. I feel it at my school site.
I urge you to be with courage
Velasco.
and not allow few people with political self-interest
Thank
to
you,
move
Ms.
us
Velasco.
in a direction that is not good for our students.
Next up, thank you. We have Juan Unified, followed by Kathy Moore.
Good evening. I had prepared a few remarks, but I think it's more important to respond to a couple of things that have been said. More help with dialogue. Mr. Hernandez, thank you for your data. You've been a good friend and a respected board member who's always accessible, so I appreciate your input. However, I want to differ with you. By your logic, if we went by population, then Congress would not have its members elected by population. By that same logic, the city of New York, because it's a small, compacted area, would not be able to break down into districts. It just doesn't make sense. We're an urban society, we're a dense society, and to me, geographic difference shouldn't be an indicator. I'm really glad that comment has been made a couple of occasions about outcomes. I would recommend indeed that the maps are drawn, that we take a close look at student outcomes. So why are we insistent for 7 board members? Let's take a look at West Arden Arcade and the city of Citrus Heights. Somebody mentioned if it ain't broken, don't fix it. I'm here to tell you it's broken. 15% of middle schools and high school students in Citrus Heights meet or exceed standards in math. 15%. That's Citrus Heights. In 2017, we saw the trend in the Sacramento Bee. 2 of our schools in Citrus Heights, San Juan and Silva, were declared some of the worst schools in the Sacramento region. That's the data. That's outcomes. What about Encina? What about the Western Arcade District? In 2018-19, 2% of Encina students met or exceeded state standards in science. So yes, let's look at the outcomes. And if you look at them fairly, you will realize 5 districts do not work. If everyone's in charge, no one's in charge. We need to go to 7 districts, 2 from West Arden Arcade and Citrus Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Unified. Next up, we have Kathy Moore, followed by Ray Real.
I am Kathy Morris. I happen to be the president of Citrus Heights District, neighborhoods 7, 8, and 9, which happen to match exactly District 2 for Citrus Heights. We support very strongly 7 districts. We believe very much, Citrus Heights is a different community. We all have different communities. We need individual representation that can listen to us. I recognize clearly that the board is concerned with the entire school district, just like my neighborhood association is concerned with the entire city of Citrus Heights. So we don't look just in one place, but we do believe we need additional representation, and we believe the way we can get it is by the expansion of the board from 5 to 7 members, so we can get appropriate coverage in Citrus Heights. Thank you.
Yeah. We have Ray Real, followed by Amy Cassini.
Thank you, trustees. I'm Ray Greeley. I live in Orangedale. I've watched this process 4 times in the last couple of years. I sit on the Citrus Heights Water District Board of Directors. I'm not representing the water district tonight, but I think it's relevant to my comments. I watched Citrus Heights go from at-large to by district. It's a very difficult process, and I don't envy you the effort that you're going to go through to put this together properly. I was fortunate because the Citrus Heights Water District was by division. So I lived in an area, all 3 of us lived in different areas, and we were elected at large, but we went through the process for CDRA to make it all by district now, so we're individual. I also watched very closely the San Juan Water District development of their by district voting. And I think they did a very poor job because they did not pay attention to communities. They had a district now. If you look at the maps, it looks gerrymandered. To me, it looks like they set it up in a way to protect the interests of the Granite Bay people who are primarily elected. 4 of their board members from Granite Bay. I like the idea on the face of it of a seven-member board here, because I think it'll give you more of an opportunity to reach into your neighborhoods far more effectively. I would like to see you consider that, but not just because I think 7 is a good number here, but because you're looking forward to the next 50 years of management of this district. And the most effective way to do that is to get more engagement in every community and communities of interest. And that's going to be a difficult thing to do. But I would urge you to think long and hard and plan for the future, not just 3 to 5 of you, but what are the future boards going to want to see? Thank you.
Next, we have Amy Kasuni, followed by Magali Kincaid.
Hi, good evening, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'm Amy Kasuni, former chair of your Parent Advisory Committee. I also, back in the day, voted most valuable parent at Earl Leggett when I worked on beautification at that school. And I also spent over 10 years in the art docent program. Lots of volunteer work in the classroom. I'm here tonight to voice my strong support for a 7-board member map. The board's Parent Advisory Committee has and continues to be presented with student educational outcome data that is very disturbing. For example, based on the most recently published school accountability report cards, averaging all elementary schools in Citrus Heights, the percentage of elementary students in Citrus Heights meeting or exceeding state standard for English language arts was only 38%, math 30%, and science 24%. This is based on state standardized tests. Northwest Arden Arcade, the elementary school data is even more concerning. English language arts, 20% of students, elementary students met state standards, and only 16 and 9 of elementary students respectively in math and science. This is a hurdle that our district must address for the sake of students, for the futures of our children. It's about lives. Improving educational outcomes is not easy, but it starts with greater connectedness to schools at the site level. A vote for a 7-board member map is a vote for greater connectedness to schools for improved student outcomes. It's a vote to support students. Thank you for your consideration.
Next up, we have Magali Kincaid, followed by Tim Kasuni.
Good afternoon. My name is Magali Kincaid, and I'm a parent of 3 children enrolled at San Juan Unified. I've lived in Arden Arcade, up and down Fulton and Watt Avenue over the last 20+ years. And as you consider a decision that will affect many of the students and families throughout this area and other areas across the district, you must prioritize their need to have a voice on the school board. West Arden Arcade needs their own representative. Citrus Heights needs their own representative. We need 7 trustee areas. It's time to put aside your personal interests and maybe some of those in the audience and bring greater accountability, empowerment into the hands of community, and deeper relationships. And you will only do that if you actually engage with the community that's asking you for 7 trustees and the others as well, but equally. Thank you.
Bravo. Tim Kasuni, followed by Maria Villalba.
Good evening, members of the board. Tim Kasuni, I'm the business owner here in Sacramento. I have 2 children, one who is a rising senior in college, another who is a rising junior. I'm sad to say my daughter is transferred out of the San Juan School District. My son is in the Ivy League. I was hoping my daughter would follow him at Mariloma. We decided not to. We feel there's a top-down lack of leadership. Starts at the state level, extends all the way down to this board. I think if you look at the sign behind you, the first word is educate. There's not education. I think all of you should wake up every morning and ask yourselves, are we educating our students? The statistics you've heard tonight should be appalling and force each one of you to look in the mirror. I strongly endorse an expansion with 7 members. I'm fearful that there will be a further mass exodus of parents who otherwise would be committed to the San Juan community. It will have a ripple effect on property values, and that will only lead to a spiraling, negative spiraling that has begun decades ago, and I'm hoping that each one of you will reverse that trend and expand this to 7 members. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Maria Grijalva, followed by Earl Lagomarsino.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Before I read from here, I wanted to tell Mr. McNichol that this is about representation. It's really about color. It's not about IEPs. It's really about colors. And I wanted to tell you that data is skewed. So if you want data that tells you that 5 works best, then you can find data that says 5 works best. It's really the data that you want to find. And so I want to say that there's been a rush to stop the 7 seats. Since the end of the shutdown, no jurisdiction has held districting hearings without Zoom or some way to address the board and public remotely. On June 7th, President Vizcarra announced that witnesses had to attend in person. We are all really eager to end odd ways of participating. There really will be no spacing restrictions. And she was kidding. Tonight, there are no sections, no single seats, no space for a speaker with a compromised immune system. So they received requests to accommodate this disability and they've been ignored. That is my request, that I requested a ADA request accommodation, which was ignored. For many of us, the pandemic is not over. Some parents have not taken jobs in the evenings to make up for income lost in the shutdown. Other households have lost a beloved abuela to COVID. So parents can't abandon young children to come here in person. For all unable to attend all evening,
That's the balance of 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Next up, we have Earl Lagomarsino, followed by Aaron Minor.
Good evening, board members and others. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I really enjoy the inspiring words up here. Educate, probably the most important one. Education is the bastion of our democracy. And our democracy thrives when we have more representation. That's why I support a 7 district, 7 member board. I think that when a elected official lives in a neighborhood where everybody around them knows that they're representing them specifically, that they're naturally they can't help but think more about the schools that are in their area because their friends and neighbors are going to those schools. Yes, I know that every member of the board is deeply committed to serving every student in this district. But perhaps sometimes it's easier to overlook when you don't have specific representation in an area. So that's why I think that more representation always better. Efficiency is not a sole determinant, or it shouldn't be a major determinant of whether or not we have democracy. There are much more efficient systems than democracy, but obviously we don't want those. And also causation is not correlation. Just because some districts have 5 and have problems, 7 and have problems and some 5, that's no proof whatsoever. There's more involved in the reasons why they may be having problems with efficiency. I believe this district would be an excellent district in working together with the Senate and the court, and they would all respect each other and work towards a common goal of serving all the students equally. Thank you.
Next up, we have Aaron Minor, followed by Carolina Flores.
Good evening. Good evening, trustees, all members of the public. I have lived in Citrus Heights for 5 years, and I have had 3 colleagues who have attended San Juan. None of them spoke well of the education. One of them was not even taught, recent graduate, was not even taught basic computer skills. San Juan High has spent its budget on state-of-the-art equipment in medieval education. Their successors will be best served by a 7-member district. For the simple reason that every individual's interests are best served when their district is served by more people, because there will be more members per citizen. And any policy that serves a minority of 1, by definition, will serve a minority of 4% or 13%. And it is serving the interests of minorities who might be underserved. That the spirit in which it is in that spirit that this law has been written and with which this board. Now, I'd like to offer 2 cautions to the board. The first one is in drawing too many comparisons between this district and others. Simply put, we cannot tell whether or not 5 members or 7 members are inherently more efficient. Let's control for every single other factor that might differ between. I have not seen any such indication in the study cited. The second is this. In all the years in which I have been engaged in public forums such as these, it is my experience that these sorts of meetings are attended by the group. To this effect, do not even know this meeting is taking place. You do not see my colleagues here. 2 of them are trying to make a living and probably not even heard of this. 1 has left the area and lives in Sacramento. For most people, if they have a voice at all, they will only be heard at the ballot box. They need 7 members. Thank you.
Next up, we have Carolina Flores, followed by Alejandro Cabrera.
Muy buenas tardes, muchas gracias que me han dado ese tiempo para dar a la audiencia los informes sobre la ley que es Ralph M. Brown Act. Es importante que la comunidad latina esté enterada de cuál es la ley y cómo es la ley que da autoridad al público, no a la agencia gubernamental. Esta mesa directiva ejecutiva de San Juan debe de recibir informes del público, recibir recursos que necesita la comunidad, se le pide a la mesa directiva. Esta ley es una manifestación de los derechos y autoridad del público que sobresalen la autoridad de todas las agencias del gobierno. El gobierno sirvará a la directiva del público. Así es la ley. El gobierno servirá las directivas del público. Las juntas de esta mesa ejecutiva de San Juan tienen que ser abiertas a todo el público, completamente abiertas. Tienen que dar esa audiencia para discutir, tiene que permitir esa participación. Si no se participa del público, no se pueden hacer decisiones en esta mesa directiva. Es la ley. No pueden continuar sin la participación del público. Ustedes necesitan que reconocer la ley, los pone a ustedes de servir a la comunidad. Ustedes tienen que ayudar a los estudiantes. Están fallando los estudiantes de Encina, San Juan, están dando fondos de recursos a artes, dieron 2% a Encina. Y Hal recibió 20% de los fondos para arte. Greer recibió 15% de los fondos de artes. Ustedes son los culpables. Ustedes son los que fallan los niños. Ustedes son los que han jugado el futuro de las hispanoparlantes, de los mexicanos, de los negros y pakistaníes. Por favor,
Gracias,
hay que
señora
corregir
Juárez.
eso.
Would you like a translator for your remarks, or would you like to read your remarks in English?
I'm going to read some of it because some of it pertains to the Brown Act.
We'll restart for 2 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you.
And we'll start time again. The Brown Act, let's clarify that. The legislature finds and declares public commission boards, school boards, all of those receive input from the public. The public has the authority to tell you, the agency, how they want things to be done, how they want you to serve, and how they want you to spend their tax dollars. This is what the people do. The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agency's servants. The people, in delegating the authority, do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. You are the instruments they created. They elected you in office, and they probably will elect you out of office. That is a right of the public. The people have a right to access information. They have a right to all documentation, and everything is being carried on in public meetings. The Brown Act says that local agencies shall be open to the public. All persons shall be attending any meeting of the legislative body. Your meetings must be open. There is no second thought. There is no separating the other languages to another room. There is no not providing Zoom, not providing public in-person meeting. You cannot get away with that. He's gotten away with it for too long, and we no longer tolerate that. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Alejandro Cabrera, followed by Ben Chafee. Apologies, Ben.
Good evening, trustees. I want to thank you all for having this public hearing today and having a conversation about the need to move towards a single member election district. My name is Alejandro Cabrera, and I'm here on behalf of Councilmember Guerra, City of Sacramento District 6. Councilman, think it's important that the district moves towards single member, smaller district representation that will allow board members to build a stronger connection with the school, with their schools and the families they serve. Smaller member districts will ensure adequate geographic representation and accountability to voters by having an accessible representative. With that said, we want to thank all of our board members who work hard, long hours in unpaid part-time positions, building the trust and relationships with their families and schools. In our council district, San Juan serves the neighborhoods of Sierra Oaks, Campus Commons, and East Ranch. We want to ensure that our board members have manageable sized districts so that they can realistically do the work that needs to get done to ensure the success of our students and our families. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Ben Chafee, followed by Mario Galvan.
Yeah, good evening, members of the board. My name is Benjamin Chapman. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight and simply express my strong support for the 7 board member man. This district needs it as well as our students. You're in a unique position to affect this important change, and support for a 7-member MAP is support for improved student outcomes and support for our students in general. Thank you.
We have Mario Galvan, followed by Diane DeKea. I'm sorry, there's a question mark here, so I think we're trying to read them right. So we'll begin with Mario.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. My name is Mario Galvan. And with all due respect to the board, I also want to address my comments to those that are watching us from outside on the media. I ask that people please insist on an open process in this decision using real 2020 data. We support the demand for 7 trustees. We ask people to send their input to board comments at but to also send a copy to the 7 trustees at neighborhoodelections.com. Again, that's neighborhoodelections.com. If the district won't post public comments, we will. So for real information, please visit neighborhoodelections.com. We provide the demographic information that they don't. This can help you decide the community of interest to which you belong. Then you can tell the trustees how they should design 7 trustee areas that will give you permanent representation. If you're registered to vote in San Juan, please sign our petition to the County Board of Education. Consider that the County Board of Education consider the proposal for 7 trustee areas, even if the incumbents submit a 5 trustee map. You can sign here tonight at our table outside, or you can email 7 trustees at neighborhoodelections.com, and we will make sure you get a petition to sign. Lastly, trustee areas are supposed to group voters based on their community of interest. It means neighborhoods defined by common shopping and recreation areas, renters, language, education, and other demographic factors, including but not limited to race. If the district ignores voters' common interest, the board can gerrymander 5 seats to try to keep safe as if they were at
Thank you,
large.
Mr. Del Ramos, for the balance of your time. Next up, Deanne.
I'm gonna let you say your last name. I don't think we have the right spelling here.
Thank you for your attempt. It's Dion Declois.
Thank you. And I just, on deck, we have Murad Ramos.
That's
So
fine.
please begin with your.
It always gets mispronounced. But with only 5 seats and a rigged map, the voters don't stand a chance of actually selecting their own trustees. It is impossible for Citrus Heights to get its own seat. The trustee in Orangevale and one of the 3 Carmichael trustees will split the city, and that is 1/4 of the district. Encina neighborhoods west of Watt and 1/5 of the district have very distinct needs, and they too will never get a dedicated voice on the board. Since they are building blocks of trustee areas, it seems logical to look at communities first and then draw the maps. Tonight, they offer you no information except race that is set out on those charts. And this is the last hearing before they draw the maps. They won't let you define your own neighborhoods. They don't care what you think your neighborhood is, whether your block is rich or poor, whether voters near you rent or own, or whether most adults have jobs or high school degrees. How many children go to school? Whether your neighborhood faces an environmental or economic challenges, whether there are many vacant homes or crowded housing, whether there are parks or bus stops or rail stops, libraries or shopping areas where people congregate and talk about politics. Tonight, they don't provide and won't use any information about crime in your area or about the quality of your neighborhood schools. They won't differentiate between established Latino neighborhoods and struggling immigrant communities. To them, all that matters is how many voters are Latino, Black, Asian, or Native American. If you are here tonight, you can see our map showing all these factors, or see them on your neighborhoodelections.com
Thank you. Next up, we have Murad Ramos, followed by Catherine Tarantini.
President Gaskus, we have hit our 30 minutes for board policy, board actions extended.
Thanks for the reminder. We have roughly 12 left for in-person comments. So I'd like to make a motion to extend public comment for the balance of our attendees here. It's been moved. I believe, I want to confirm that you're seconding that motion, Ms. Creasy, or moving the motion.
I am moving the motion.
And there's a second from Ms. Costa. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That was unanimous. Mr. Serrano, please begin.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. Actually, I'm standing before you tonight as a parent who lived in a district for almost 2 decades. During these years, I witnessed that diversity and inclusion evolved in the district from inclusion within language accommodation to refugee students and parents to actually within the board. 20 years. Wow, what a change that I've seen, but I came into this board, so I'm glad to see that. For decades, millions of Middle Eastern Americans like myself, my family, and I had no choice but to self-identify as white. So when we talk about census, it's usually a sore subject for my community. So I'm here, in short, I'm here tonight to support the by-district election and a 7-member board to allow for better engagement and representation in each district. Thank you.
Yeah. Next up, we have the calendar and Trustee Areas, followed by the mayor's guest.
Yeah.
Catherine?
Tell her.
Do we have Ms. Tarantini with us?
Out of the room. Something else done.
We're gonna move to Ms. Canton and we'll circle back to Ms. Tarantini. Ms. Canton.
Good evening, board members. I'd like to, good evening, board members. I just want to address some of the comments that have been made tonight about the narrative that's been put out there, that some of the comments led people to believe, or would lead you to believe, that the 7-member board issue has been led by disgruntled people who ran for office and didn't get that. That's not at all how it happened. It has been led by parents who have been in this district for 20 to 25 years, who reached out to those people who ran for office, who then joined and said, we will help. Because as we have seen, we cannot get people elected in this school district if the teachers union is not for them. Moving to 7 gives us smaller areas, gives us an opportunity to focus. I have spoken with each and every one of you about the needs at Encina High School in the West End. 25 years, and we still have so many of the same issues. If we had a board member who lived in that neighborhood, who met with their constituents on a regular basis, who had access, we wouldn't have this issue. I can tell you, I bet that Mr. Kern, he'll have real parents in his office. How many Encina parents have been able to go to his office and have a conversation with him? Through no fault of his, who lets nobody let them in there. We have to do better than this. Our students deserve it. Our community deserves it. I live in this community. I've educated 3 children in this community. We need to move to 7 so that we can give good representation. Living in Fair Oaks does not give you a good idea of how life is in Citrus Heights or on the West End. So I thank you for the time, but please don't listen to the narrative of those who want to keep it this way so they can continue to be incompetent. Thank you, Ms. Catherine.
Is Ms. Catherine Tarantini here? Okay, we will move on to Lisa Pelletier, followed by Faith Arguello. That's my best guess. Apologies. Lisa, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm ready. My name is Lisa Pelletier. I had 3 children in San Juan Unified until COVID hit. And in my opinion, the board and superintendent shut down, refused to listen to parents, refused to do what's best for the kids, lied to us, betrayed us, left our kids hanging out to dry. And I know I'm not alone. I was so disappointed to hear today your comments about the mapping. Not one of you said, I really want to connect with the parents who are frustrated. I want to help the kids who are hurting and failing and cutting themselves and committing suicide and suffering from bullying by teachers and peers who insist on people with medical exemptions wearing masks. Anyway, I was hoping you guys would say something like that, but instead, Mr. Hernandez offers that maybe we should look at square miles when we determine representation. Square miles, we're people. We are people, and your obligation is to represent us. This is for the viewers. Please visit recallsanjuanunifiedboe.org. We have recall petitions for all of them. People like me who lead the parents need to be on that board right over there. The mapping is important. Please go to this website, neighborhoodelections.com. You're gonna communicate with us. We're gonna band together. We're gonna fix the district so our kids can come back. We're gonna end critical race. We're gonna bring local control back to San Juan Unified so you feel safe sending your child to school and you know you have a voice. Thank you.
Okay, Leo, possibly with T, I'm so sorry. And then followed by her is Scott Rafferty. Thank you, ma'am. Please begin when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. But don't worry, it gets mispronounced all the time. So.
I do my best not to, but.
So continuing with the previous comments, I just want to say that last year the board said it was wrong to comply in 2020 because using the 2010 census to determine the area size somehow left out refugees, even though their areas may have lost population. Once they got their at-large election, the board reversed itself, insisting on using 2010 data. The 2020 census is almost certainly the least accurate in recent history. Still, the district must use 2020 data in the next election, so it makes no sense to draw maps to nowhere. This census has enormous uncertainty, but for heroic efforts by our state government, there would be a huge undercount of urban areas and of Latinos. It is difficult to imagine where undercount could matter more than within San Juan. Orangevale has one of the highest self-response rates in the state. West of Watt, amongst the lowest. Having claimed that this census would differ radically from 2010, San Juan now says that there will be almost no change in its population. Their private data from Geolytics said it has increased only 10,500. The census says 17,000. The odds that the census overestimated growth by 70% is about 1 in 300,000. Both data sets show big shifts within San Juan. The demographer says Encina and Citrus Heights grew, many blocks doubling in population. Areas where trustees live declined. The census estimates change in 85 tracts, not 3,700 blocks, but shows a similar disparity. It is likely true.
Thank you, ma'am. That's the balance. I'll just a minute.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Scott Rafferty, followed by Bill Simmons.
So we had a script tonight. We didn't finish it because there were just so many other really important things to say. But we've sent you over 40 pages of data, maps, and examples, and none of it gets posted. None of it, ever. Not even our original petition. And this just isn't democracy. You read written comments very selectively. We discriminate based on viewpoint. But your data here from all these private sources that Trustee Hernandez has, your demographer has, it's just not right. It's not the official data. You need to use the official data. And that's what we've given you about school size and trustee size. You just need to be more open and listen to the community. I do appreciate, President Velasquez, that you recognize that there were different parts of our arcade, especially east of Watt. It's different. But we've given you information about crime, about all the barriers to participation in government. And this reform is meant to empower those communities. And yes, it's good for everyone. It's good for all neighborhoods. The Citrus Heights, they haven't had somebody on the board for 19 years. And they're a quarter of the district. And their needs are very different than Arden Arcade. They need to have voice on the board. They don't need to be split up between someone in Orangevale and someone in Carmichael. And with 5 seats, you can do criteria number 8, where you're protecting yourself, everybody's their own district,
there's no room for them. It's over. We're giving you the seven-member option because it is the norm. You are one of the biggest in the country not to have only 5 members, and one of the only ones that's at large. So please take it seriously. If you say 7 districts tonight, we'll settle the lawsuit.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Next up, we have Bill Simmons, followed by David Hawkins.
Members of the board, Superintendent Kern, my name is Bill Simmons. I've lived in the district for 32 years and voted in every election for this board. I also know that this board has done great things at school sites around our district, and they have served the students in Arden Arcade by rebuilding Dyer Kelly, by rebuilding Greer, by rebuilding Del Paso Manor. If we had a 7-member board representing 7 districts like many of our neighbors do, there would not be consensus to serve the needs of the most neediest schools. This board has done a great job. We have 60% of the board are minorities. That's not recognized by Mr. Rafferty's group. But Mr. Rafferty doesn't live in the district. Mr. Rafferty's made money off of this as an attorney, and he has got a group of disgruntled politicians that lost board seats to come to this board and to make statements. You will notice that there were many members that came up here tonight and spoke to you. They do not live in the district. They live outside the district and have come with Mr. Rafferty to make noise. Listen to the voters in the district. Listen to the people who you represent. You represent the people who live in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on, everybody will get equal time to make their say, and we appreciate you can make hand gestures. You can just do it quietly. Next up, we have David Hawkins, followed by Michelle Wright.
Hi, everyone. David Hawkins. I actually live in the district. I actually have 2 sons that have gone through San Juan. One at Del Campo, which was not the greatest experience, and our youngest who's now at San Juan High School. I'm a labor advocate. That's what I do for a living. And frankly, I'm embarrassed by some of the comments of the union. I think what would be helpful, no, we don't need snapping. I think this would be helpful. There are narratives that people are putting in place. There are assumptions that people are putting in place. There are misunderstandings that people have put in place because the stakeholders aren't talking to each other. And I think that that's a disservice to the board to have people come up and oppose or support something based on what the latest catchy phrase is versus what is the impact on our students and the community. And that's what I'd like to try to touch on. President Villasquez, I'd like to thank you, first of all, for your clarifying questions. I was looking through the resolution and I saw the piece on draft maps. I didn't know if it was 5 or 7, and I don't think you've decided. Maybe you have, but I have not come to the conclusion that this board's decided that it needs to be a 5 or a 7 seat conclusion. I was honored to be appointed to the inaugural LCAP committee by a member of this group, and she was president in 2014. I was in 4th grade. And we had a very nice conversation about the diverse needs of the district and about the need to be inclusive of the members of this district who were not being included at the time, and that was 7 years ago. And it seemed to me that if we open dialogue and have some conversations, we might be able to be more inclusive with a larger board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Next, we have Michelle Wright, followed by Michael Nishimura.
Hi, I'm Michelle Wright. I'm a Fair Oaks resident and grew up going to school in Fair Oaks. And I have benefited from overrepresentation. So I am actually in support now of a 7-member by district board because I don't think people from my neighborhoods actually need continued overrepresentation. I think it would benefit everyone, and especially students who are at schools that don't perform as well as the schools I went to have increased representation, to have people that understand their backgrounds and and their experiences, because I think in designing their education, they need people that understand where they come from. So the more access we have, the greater inclusiveness and people that are more representative of each of the community. I think that would just allow for increased, a better reflection to your policies in how you govern this district. Thank you.
Next, we have Michael Nishimura, followed by Herman Badamona.
Thank you, board members. My name is Mike Nishimura. I'm the Vice President of the Residents Empowerment Association of Citrus Heights. I'm also on the board for our neighborhood association. And I'm also planning commissioner for the city of Citrus Heights. I'm very happy that you are moving over from at-large elections to by trustees. I would really like to see it go to 7 trustees, just to be more, it would make it a lot more fair and equitable, be a lot easier to draw them out. Citrus Heights represents almost 25% of the district students, yet we have not had any representation for almost 19 years, almost 20 years. So I think that it's high time. And I just feel that 7 seats would make it a lot more equitable and fair for everybody involved. I was not quite aware of the problems that, our arcade area had. So I would really like you to consider the 7 trustee area. And to the comment that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I'm sorry, but it is. My own stepdaughter lives in Citrus Heights. She owns her home. And the charter schools are coming. We have one opening up in our neighborhood association. And she's gone so far as to check into sending her daughter, my granddaughter, to start school next year, sending her into class with him because of the performance of the schools in Citrus Heights. And I don't want to see that. I'd like to see it fixed.
Followed by Teresa Amador.
Good evening, members of the board, superintendent. Thank you for having us here today, and it's a long night. I'm a parent here in San Juan Unified. I'm a voter here, and I'm very disappointed to see that the results and then data to report that Black and brown kids are suspended at the highest rates than any other ethnic group in the school district. Encina High School still doesn't have an engineering and technology program like Rio Americano does. So we hope that this efforts to increase the representation at the local level to create a kind of small learning community where we can hold somebody accountable to bring those resources to our neighborhoods. And I'm in full support of this. I'm also here on behalf of my organization that I'm part of. It's called United Latinos. We're a health and environmental justice organization that's funded by different groups here in town. And we've been meeting with the Community Action Network to keep an eye on this effort because it's very important to us. So I have their full support from the board, their membership, that I'm here to speak on their behalf to say that we do support the 7 district system. Thank you.
Next up, we have Teresa Amador, followed by Jocelyn Milan.
Thank you for having me. My name is Teresa Amador. I am a parent of 3 children, one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. I am not a disgruntled politician. I am a homeowner, and I reside within the district in the boundaries. And I am in support of a 7 trustee map. I worked for 23 years with special education. I've been an independent consultant in districts across Northern California. I've also been in Kansas, Colorado. I've seen how different districts do it. I grew up in a rural community where we had representation, and my mother served on the board there and was able to see the impact that they had by representing. I came from an affluent area where my school was in a small farm town. It was rural, and we were able to get the community to work together. And I feel it's important to have individual representation. Student outcome is important, and I think it's really important that the board look at and define what run successfully means. As a parent and a homeowner, I define that as student outcome, test scores, dropouts, district rankings, number of suicides that's happened, housing, business, cost of living. As somebody who owns a home, it's important for me to keep that and have that value. And when I'm looking at other areas to relocate or move, the first thing I look at as a parent is what are the schools performing at and how successful they are. And I look at our response to COVID, and during a board meeting, Mr. Kern spoke and said that we have so many moving parts. It's really difficult to get anything moving and working together. We're really working really hard. Well, that's my point for looking at, yes, the car has many moving parts too. But if we just look at it as this whole and the engine light's on and we don't do anything about what's happening and what needs to happen to improve equitability, how resources is funding and allocated, how many communities are underrepresented, how many areas have Title I schools and have heavily impacted that don't have that individual representation, I think is very important. Thank you.
Next, we have Prop 21.
Good evening, everyone. We are here as graduates of Citrus Heights Schools, San Juan High School graduate, a graduate of UC Davis and Sacramento State. We are both currently in master's programs. We thank you for your leadership and support and find board members. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the end of our public comment for individuals who signed up to hear in person. As was announced at the beginning of the meeting, for this series of special meetings, we will also be reading written comment, and I'll turn to Mr. Allen to help facilitate that.
Certainly, President Biasca, we have 7 comments that have been submitted tonight, including those received before 6 p.m. tonight. Our first comes from Elizabeth Rope, who writes, I am in support of redrawing the district map to include 7 neighborhoods instead of the current 5. San Juan is a very large district, including more voices in school district decisions is incredibly important for ensuring the community voices are heard and considered. Having communities speak to their needs is vital to making sure they are being served by the district. Expansion from 5 to 7 seems like a very reasonable way of getting more communities involved and giving them the opportunity to advocate for their needs. Our next comment is from Anita Mancina, who writes, I've thought a lot about the issues surrounding the board discussion tonight. I can see how, on paper, it makes sense to expand board membership to enhance community representation, but I can't help but wonder if this move will result in the exact opposite. In looking at the research around affecting school boards, the one thing that jumps out is the importance of collaboration and building a strong team. Several studies caution that a board can become ineffective when members focus on the interests of a specific neighborhood over the interests of the district as a whole. While each of the communities in San Juan is unique, I believe it is my job as a community member to bring those needs to the attention of the board. It is the board's job to think about them in the context of the whole in order to ensure that we are doing our best work for all the students we serve. In order to do this well, the board needs to be collaborative and respect each other's points of view, something I fear will become more difficult if the size of the board is increased. As I stated earlier, I can see why people believe that expanding the size of the board, creating trustee areas will improve representation, but without intentionality, this is not guaranteed. So I ask that you consider what steps you will take, no matter the decision, to build a strong board that engages in effective dialogue and mutual respect for the good of the whole. Our next comment comes from Michael Seaman, who writes, as I commented for your postponed June 15th meeting, I prefer 7 districts, not 5, so that disadvantaged and or historically neglected communities, for example, West Arden Arcade, North Islands, Citrus Heights, West Carmichael, etc., will be represented on the school board. I appreciate that SJUSD will be using 2020 census data, even though the data are late. 7 districts should be apportioned by a population density and seek to maintain the integrity of the neighborhoods, communities, and unincorporated areas with consideration for racial, ethnic, and economic demography. It would be wrong to slice districts such that trustees from affluent areas west of Watt, south of Northrop, or east of Watt, from Arden Oaks southward to the river, will get to speak for the diverse, comparatively disadvantaged, densely populated areas to their north. At least one trustee area should cover the area north of Northrop and west of Watt, as that area has no middle schools, a neglected high school, too many charter schools, several close to school sites, abundant rental housing, and a significant homeless population. Our next comment is from Alan Lovett, who writes, as a voter in the community for 42 years, I want the board members to know that most of us in the community want 5 trustee areas. We want more teachers, counselors, teachers' aides, and social workers. We do not need more board members. Districts around us with 7 board members are highly dysfunctional. We want to have a highly functional 5-member board. Our next comment is from somebody whose name is entered as Tommy Nelson. I support the board in moving to trustee areas. I support you exploring both a 5 or 7-member board, whatever provides the best governance for our students. But I don't support our attorneys like Scott Rafferty trying to get rich off the process. For the past decade or longer, Rafferty has been going up and down the state, sending out threatening letters to school boards and city councils, warning them that if they fail to acquiesce with the demand, will bring legal action against the school district or the city, the kind of legal action that can potentially cost a school board, a school district, or a city more than $1 million in legal fees. In his petition, he notes that election code allows plaintiff attorneys to collect fees of up to $33,000 for working on the petition, and that doesn't include far steeper fees that may result if the case comes up in court. Many believe attorneys such as Rafferty are in it for the payout. Rafferty says the legal actions are about establishing fair elections that will ultimately improve city services and create opportunities in every part of the city. If that is truly what you believe, Mr. Rafferty, then acknowledge the district has started the process to move to by trustee-area elections. Let your $33,000 move on, or stay and prove to everyone that you are looking for a much bigger payout. Public, spend a couple of minutes researching this man. You will know what type of person he is. Read, taking money from our kids. Our next comment is from John Francis, who writes, you do not listen. We are still suffering from COVID. Our caregiver died. We cannot leave our children alone all evening. Where else in California is anyone requiring people to show up in person just to be heard? You care only about yourselves. That's why we need your 7 trustees. And our final comment is anonymous, who writes, you should not require identification on your form. We have good reason to be anonymous. I do not want to be attacked personally like Trustee Creason did to Austin Schwacher. We need 7 area trustees so everyone has someone accountable to them, not to the special needs.
And that's the end of our public comment. We will then bring it back to the dais for comments and discussion. We're gonna do another round down the dais. Again, just to repeat, I am taking notes. At some point, we will have to return to actually with the text of the criteria and what we want to adopt, but I'll continue to listen. We'll have some discussion first. Mr. Hernandez.
I personally want to appreciate everyone who made a comment. I do appreciate those for that support 7, those who support 5, and those that are looking out for specific interests and the need for their community. I think that's a great thing about being part of our democracy, that we are able to be heard. And again, I do appreciate, I want you to know very much, and I appreciate those comments directed to me. Because more than anything, I think it makes us all think. And again, I stick to my comment that I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's point of view, and which will help me come up with a decision. And especially, I want to point out one more time that I am not promoting 7 or 5 at this time. I really do want to hear all the parties involved. And
more than anything, I appreciate all the people that came out here publicly to make their comment heard. So thank you so very much. And as far as interest is concerned, I support all the ideas that have been already been addressed. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. And while I acknowledge that was in the public comment, I did not formally end the public hearing, so there's nothing for you to apologize, so that was totally on me. So I formally declare the public hearing closed. We will come back to board. Ms. Costa.
I agree with Mr. Hernandez. I really appreciate all the people who came and spoke, and the people who are on YouTube listening and providing written comment. I have not made up my mind. I really am interested in community input, and I really would like to hear what people are thinking, and that's why I listed the dates of the public meetings earlier, because I think that it is really important that we hear from the widest number of people possible what their thinking is. As I said earlier, the emails that I'm receiving are all over the place, as well as the phone calls. So I think the more people we hear from, the better it will be in terms of our decision making.
Ms. Creason.
Thank you. I do want to address some of the public comments. That's okay. All right. It seemed to me in some of the comments, it sounded as if folks think decisions have been made and they haven't. And that's why we're having these hearings, and there's more hearings to come to help inform the decision. Thank goodness. That's what I came here to do, is to represent community. So I'm not sure if maybe I misunderstand or others are misunderstanding, but no decisions have been made. There's a couple of comments from a couple of people about engaging with community, that we should be engaging with community to talk about this issue, and that there should be more stakeholder engagement as a whole. And I agree 100%. And I just want to be very transparent that I try to call back or email back anyone that emails me. Where it gets tricky is where there's a lawsuit. I'm not allowed to anymore. I can't talk about what's in the lawsuit, especially with who's suing us. And just to be very transparent, I got a phone call. I had one phone call with a community member. The next day we got that letter, and that stopped it. I couldn't. So I just want it to be known that I wish that we could just sit down at Milagro and talk it out, because this is an important decision that has to happen. I've always been transparent that this is something that needs to happen. So I just wanted to put that out there. Regarding census has come up several times. Census was not a part of any of our decision making at all. I have said many times that I wish that we could have waited, and that was always my intent. And I made this very clear. For 2022 election, which is when I'm up for re-election, have nothing to do with incumbency for me, that we should be by district. And the reason why is because census would be up. This is way before COVID, and that we knew that things were going to be the way they were. That was my personal want. That never was a part of the decision making, because there was a lawsuit. And so it kind of changed the trajectory of how things were done. So I just want to make that clear. Yes, I wish we could have waited for census 100%. I said it a million times. COVID messed up everything, including the data we're going to get. And I recognize that. And it's unfortunate, and we should go with the best data that we have. But I think the law is going to force our hand on the data we get to use. And it's my understanding that will be 2020 census data, nobody else's data. And then we'll do it again in 2022 because we have to, or with the 2020, I'm sorry. We're going to start with the 2010 data, and then we have to do it again with the 2020 data because we have to. Do we have a choice? Okay. Okay. I was writing notes the whole time. I literally have a tally of who wants what. There's a lot of good ideas that I was able to grab from this. But I got to say too, this is the people system. I believe that 100%. So it is hard because I am a parent. I do have a kid. I'm an advocate that got elected in 2018. I've always been for the people. I came from the hood. So it's hard when I hear people say that you're only out for your self-interest, because that's just not true. And I heard somebody talk about critical race theory. If you want to recall me for caring about people of color, recall me. I'm all right with that. I will never, ever bow down to that, ever. Just know that we're people too. You know, I mean, that's not what we're here to be like, oh, go for us. It's not that, but I mean, this should, in my view, this should be a dialogue so we can get where we want to be as a community. I'll leave it there. Sorry, I had a lot of notes. I want to make sure that I. One clarification that I do want to make too, it's my understanding that even when we go by district, that we are responsible for the district as a whole, not just our area. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. And if it helps at all, I'll just take an opportunity to add. I went back and listened to our March 10th initial hearing meeting over a year ago at this point. And it was a unanimous sentiment amongst us all that regardless of what happened, we would do what we could to set the norm to make sure that the governance team that succeeds does so with intention and watching out for the entire. So yes.
I think that's an important point. And again, I touched on this before we went into public comment, and it's really weighing heavy on me. We're going to be we're going to have to work as a community to address the fact that we're an open enrollment district. We're an open enrollment district. So although we're going to be voted in by the people, or maybe one of you are going to be voted in by the people in your community, not all of them are going to go to school in your community. So that's just that. And again, that's not something we're going to be able to resolve on dais tonight. But it's something that I hope that we all could really think about, because that's the real stuff that's going to affect kids that we're going to have to talk out and figure out what that means and how do we represent our kids. I mean, I'm going to probably be in that boat too. You know, if I happen to be reelected, if not, I get my evenings back. I can help out in other ways, but it's very possible that my son will be going to a school that's not in a district that I represent. And so what do you know, how do we navigate that? I don't know. And that's not just me as a board member, but as the community that's voting too. Just something to think about. I hope we all can work together to figure out how we address that.
Ms. Greason, can I explain? That may actually end up being a benefit to helping us try and represent more than just an individual area, because you will know that you're representing folks that voted for you who have students in other parts of the district. You know, one of the things I think we've heard, and we've heard this for a while, is that idea of having a connection to a board member in a region. And you know, as you try and engage the community, I think that's something that by going to trustee areas allows.
Yeah, and I hope none of that comes off as if I was trying to minimize the relationship that comes from having a vote member. Absolutely, that's 100% true, and I agree with that, and I'm glad we're going that way. But it's just a layer that I think we should cover. That's enough for me. Thank you.
Dr. McKibben.
Couple things. First of all, thank all of you, those of you who showed up and came here, those of you who offered written comments and that sort of thing. They're all very important, and that I think all of us were taking notes, and we really appreciate you being part of this democratic process and saying to us what you feel and what you believe. I want to join this conversation and talk a bit about who we represent. In many cases, of course, we all represent the voters. You have to recognize that only about 20% of the people in this school district actually have children in schools. Now, we do indeed represent them, and they're very important, but we also represent the other 80%, and that's the thing. In fact, none of us could get elected without those people who do not have children in schools, and it's very important because those kids come back to our communities and become community members. So investing in all of our kids and listening to all of the people is very important. One of the dilemmas that I think that we face as a school board is exactly the point that I think Mr. Kern was making, is that over the last 6 to 7 years that I've been a school board member, that I've tried to do both. One is, to join organizations like the Orangeville Community Council and that sort of thing, because those people talk to the other people in the community. But in fact, if you look at the mileage on my car, in fact, that for many of us, I think for virtually all of us, we visited every school in the community because we want to hear about all of the different kinds of programs. And that's the thing. I'm worried that there will be less of that, but I think that we will all work indeed to not have that. In fact, before COVID, that I had spent about 5 times as much time on the west side of the district than on the east side of the district where I live. I think that will continue with boards if we vote for responsible people. But the notion is that indeed, for 16 years of my career, I spent 100,000 miles around the state talking to school districts, and I was the director of teacher development and bringing teachers of color into classrooms. Did that, and I will tell you that there wasn't, that many of the boards, the best boards that I dealt with, that did the best job of bringing people of color into our classrooms were on 5-member boards. It did not matter much on that. So the notion of having larger boards necessarily makes better government just doesn't have a ring of truth to it.
Thank you, Dr. McKibben. I will just echo thanks for everybody who has engaged in this stage of the process, and take one last opportunity to emphasize this is a step in a multi-step process that will continue through the summer. And so we will, all of the meetings are in the board packet, and we will continue to advertise that process and work to get the word out. I do want to turn my colleague's attention to the criteria of the establishment of trustee areas, which is an action item for the evening. And I was listening closely, so I have a proposed method forward, and then want to open it for discussion, which is my proposal is to add here as the 11th criteria. Just have to figure out there. The item around each district having one high school that Ms. Costa proposed. And then once I want to see if there's anything else we want to add, and then we will have a quick discussion of what we don't want to include it, and then hopefully be able to go about what if that works. Is there any, I'm getting head nodding just for those, for our audience at home. What I just have officially written down, just so you know, Ms. Costa, the boundaries of the trustee area shall include at least one high school or more. So that would be 11. That would be item number 11. Is there anything else here that we would want to directly add to this? And again, distinguishing between this and the information that was shared that our demographers will take back. I'm sure they've been listening very, very intently. I didn't hear a specific additional item here, but I want to see if I am wrong. Mr. Hernandez.
I just want to make an emphasis. I don't know if we have to put it in there. It may be just a focus because serving on a liaison as a facility member, I think it's important that those lines be drawn in a way that if there's a safety issue, that a child's going to have to cross a big street, Sunrise, Hazel, Dewey, Greenback, Farrell's Boulevard. You see what I mean? If those big streets can help to, for safety reasons, then we pay attention to that, because I think it's important for kids that are traveling. And we do, if possible, pay attention to those big streets. And I think you mentioned it in the criteria, but I think it's for safety factors that we pay attention to it. That's all.
Do you think that it's adequately captured in 7? Where
I think it is.
Okay, I just want to confirm.
I think more for /safety underneath that for transportation for those students that walk.
So do you want to add safety considerations here? Are there any objections to that? I don't see any objections, but we're going to continue the conversation. Okay. Ms. Costa? Ms. Creason?
A point came up, and this is something I have spoken on a couple of times when we're going over data, is the fact that a lot of immigrant communities are jumbled as white, and we know that our immigrant communities have unique needs. So do I understand correctly that item 6, communities of interest, make sure that we're considering that, or do we need something else to make sure that we're considering communities that aren't the white that we think about when we say white?
No, I think that captures it. I will say that there's a limit to what the census will look at and the data that we will have. So I think throughout the, the process is intended to look at a map and say, wait, hold on a sec. This is dividing a unique community in this area, and we need to think about that. And so because we're going to have multiple opportunities to look at maps, to evaluate them on the criteria that we mentioned and are very clearly prescribed in federal and state law. But then there's also from you as board members, from the community that comes out and brings things to our attention that, oh, you know what, you're right. We should go back and see if there's a way to keep that community together. So just to clarify, there was some comments earlier about the data that we use. We're required to use census data, as you pointed out, but we can also look outside of that. We can incorporate other things that, frankly, there's not as formalized a process for gathering that data or quantifying it. We can try to come up with other ways to make sure it reflects, again, those communities of interest, and that we're capturing that properly.
I appreciate that, and I don't propose to know the how we get there, but the what really is concerning to me, right? I want to make sure that we do that appropriately, and I'm not, so this is what I think about when we're talking about some communities, especially if we're talking about immigrant, refugee, newcomer communities. We know that that those families don't often show up to stuff like this. So they may not be around to point out a map saying, hey, you're, separating my community on this map. And so we're relying on those of us that aren't a part of that community to be able to call that out. So I guess I'm just saying, again, I'm not proposing to know how to address that, but that is a concern that I would like to be addressed to make sure we don't do that.
Can I jump in with a potential suggestion, which I think communities of interest is inclusive of that, and so we're therefore not limited just to the census data. However, I wonder, one, if it's legally permissible, so I'll just get the lawyers in the room to double it. Just to add maybe item 6, a sentence that says, this may include the district information, the use of district information allowable for use in accordance with privacy laws regarding enrollment and service provision.
I think that makes sense.
It makes sense, but it depends how much that information.
Well, we can add the catch-all insofar as practicable, which I actually hate the language of, but doing this for a living is usually what we add at the end.
It may be
Well, we won't get into that right now. Sure, but it would just be inclusive of district data that we could use. Again, it wouldn't include data that we're not allowed to use for HIPAA and other reasons, but that privacy provision is working there as well.
And I'm not proposing we know how to get there, but if we could just have a placeholder so we do figure that out as we're going through the process, I'm comfortable with that. I don't know how.
Well, it's also a may, so it's not like we have to use it, but it's there and it calls it out.
Because that helps. I mean, I know I'm talking about a specific community that is jumped at, put into this one bucket, but that's, I mean, this is with all communities, and the problem with that aggregating data, right? Asian is a whole lot of communities. We know that some communities, some low-income communities, just, it's not the same engagement level. So I want to make sure I share their voices. And that said, it's my understanding that once we get to the map piece, we will be accepting comments via Zoom. Is that correct?
When we do those community meetings,
Yeah, well, we actually have the maps out
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So we're gonna have in person and there's gonna be.
One of the things that I was gonna say around that is we have some data specific to our schools related to immigrant populations. I wonder if we could provide that to the demographer, because when we talk about communities of interest, I can't remember what community member said it tonight about individuals who are, whether they're playing sports together or they're shopping in certain areas, that can be affected by those communities of interest. And so we could try and provide some of that data as soon as possible so that you could see that.
So we can do that without adding it into the criteria. Is that sufficient, or do you want language specifically calling out non-census data, which is probably more?
And as long as we're committing to do it, that's all I need. So if we're doing it, and that number 6.
Yeah, one of the challenges we're faced with in this compressed timeline is you have a map to produce, first map to produce in 5 days. And 2 of those days of the weekend. And we have a lot of staff that are out right now or have just retired as of yesterday. And so we'll do what we can to get you that, but that could be a challenge. Yeah, we'll do what we can. One of the things that I wanted to share about the community meetings as well, because we talked the last time about what ways could we really try and get that information out to everybody. We have, and Trent, do you want to speak to this real quick in terms of the mailer that we're trying to send out to every member of our community?
There we go. So we do have several different avenues we are using to reach out. One is a community-wide mailer, so we'll go to every household within the district. It's actually been a long time since we've done a piece of snow melt to everybody in the district, whether they're a family or not. So that will be going out, should be hitting mailboxes towards mid next week or end of next week, English and Spanish, with links to materials in other languages provided online. We do have calls going out via our systems, our social media as well. The website's really fantastic where all the materials are available in multiple languages. And then we do have multiple advertisements going up in the local newspapers, as well as media releases going out next week.
So I know we kind of talked about it, but can we do the at lunch distributions, provide flyers? So I think that'll get a little.
Yeah, we could try something like that. Hopefully the mailer, yeah, we can add that to it. The mailers to every household in the district really encompasses.
It gives everyone once.
Yep.
Because we're doing social media, that'll hit some people twice.
Yeah,
so lunch might hit it.
We can have that.
I want to thank you for following up on that. I really do. And I know it put staff in a tight timeline to get a mailer out to every household in this district. But that really, I think, allows us to engage every community member who wants to be engaged. So thank you for following up.
Yeah, we really wanted to, and we can do that when we pass out meals as well. The challenge there is most of that is our school community. And we really wanted to find a way that we could get to broader than just our school community. As I think Dr. McKinney mentioned, the majority of our district do not have students in our school system. And so how do you reach those families? Because we do know that there are folks out there. I think we had a couple emails in tonight that aren't necessarily folks with students, but they wanted to have their voice heard. And so that's part of the process. We did not want it to, we wanted to try and explore every way possible in the short time frame that we could get the information.
I totally understand. I absolutely agree that we have to get everybody that has voice in our community. I'm the only parent, with a kid currently in a district school. And so my lens does tend to go towards, what can we do at the school site? But that in no way is intended to diminish community as a whole. It's just uplifting school sites.
Before I move to Dr. McKibben, I just want to make clear that we're good with number 6 and it being inclusive of other communities not counted by census data. So the boundaries of the trustee areas may observe communities of interest. That's good. We haven't gotten there yet. We're still on that addition. We'll come circle back to any, taking anything off. Dr. McKibben.
I have about one is that the related to the gerrymandering piece. I do think that we should either have incumbency as a very low priority or as not one of our criteria. I think that it tends to get in the way of putting our districts into things that look like sponges rather than the compactness that the other criteria have. So that's my first. The second one has to do with, I appreciate the adding the other interest groups like immigrants and those former refugees, things like that. And finally, I think that in the notion that keeping communities together, not only the high schools, but the high schools and the recognizing that the high schools represent more than people in schools, but represent the whole community. And we are, after all, a community school district. And so we ought to have and keep those people involved. That's why I really appreciate the snail mail going out on this one, because it really does recognize how important this vote is and that everybody ought to be involved.
Thank you, Dr. McKibben, and that actually brings me to the point that I wanted to clarify, which was, by discussing it, our team will be taking it into consideration. It doesn't need to be captured here, but there was a distinction brought up earlier, which is the difference between including or considering the physical location of a high school and including or considering where those students live. Like those are two different things. I'm just curious if folks had input. I interpreted it to me when I think of kind of feeder patterns, matriculation of school sites, etc. I'm keeping in mind where the student live, but I think practically it would have to be based on the physical location of those. Will you turn on your mic?
Is that synonymous with boundaries? Because
I suppose it is, yeah. But again, that's for our boundary schools, right? That's crazy.
So that gets tricky again. So we're thinking about El Camino, it's 100%.
Oh, your mic. Yeah.
That was
the little.
El Camino is a great example of a school that doesn't have any boundaries. It's 100% open enrollment. So I don't know that can fit into that criteria. So, and again, I'm sorry to be a broken record, but we're an open enrollment school. So that I think further complicates it because we can't really say the kids go to this school just because they live there. So to me, that means that we have to do just physical school site.
Mr. Hernandez?
Ms. Creason, I think that El Camino is a pure open enrollment, but I think by boundary, there is a boundary set by the schools where they sit geographically. Isn't that correct?
Well, our non-boundary schools have this area around it, this we call the 40% area where those individuals have, but those schools really are non-boundary. So we have some unique challenges when we look at boundaries. And again, I think going back, actually watching one of the other districts again, their board talked about let's try and split boundaries because then at least two board members have involvement in a school rather than it just being owned by one. And so different districts do this very differently. I think as was presented to us tonight, some of these things are going to have to take priority of others. Even your comment about like major thoroughfares, our boundaries don't take all of those things into consideration all the time. So there may be a boundary for a high school where you absolutely have to cross certain major thoroughfares. So there's going to come some complications in this, and really then what is the prioritization? I think that will be the great part about having multiple maps produced where we can really hear from the community about, wait, this doesn't make sense. And those are the folks in those communities saying this is problematic for our community based on whatever the reasons being. So we'll have to take all these things, and that's why they're drawing the maps and not us.
Yeah. Dr. McKibben.
Having been one of those persons that lived on one side of the street and the other side of the street went to another school too, you can mess up communities by saying, okay, you can't cross, there are busy streets that you shouldn't cross. So it's a slippery slope on that one, and I wish I had an answer, but
I think the boundary, and I should know this better, Art Middle School is a good example. You've got Watt Avenue right there. The other side of it is not Art Middle School, or a portion of that is not. So kids at times can literally see a school, but that's not their home school. If we drew the boundaries now, they would probably look very different than they would have as we were kind of growing this district.
So I think in conclusion on our addition, the boundaries, this discussion around being inclusive of at least one high school, it would be inclusive of where that physical high school is located. And again, it is at least one high school or more. So more to come on that. I want to make sure, I'm not hearing any other significant additions at this time. No, yeah, it was that right there. Okay, so now what I have captured here is Ms. Costa's addition as well, which is the new number 11, and Mr. Hernandez's addition and clarification of safety considerations incorporated into number 7. So now we can move our discussion to ones we don't want included, and there was primarily discussion around item 8. The boundaries of the trustee areas may consider avoiding pairing 2 or more incumbents in a single trustee area to the extent legally allowable. I want to open this up for discussion, but I think at least 2 of us have already indicated a preference to have this removed, a desire to have this removed. Is there any further discussion? Okay. There's a consensus to have item 8 stricken from the criteria list. Okay. I want to make sure there's nothing else here that we want to consider for removal. Take one last look. As a reminder, the first 3 criteria are legally mandated, so those are not on the option list. Seeing none, this is an action item, so I'm going to repeat. This is an action item to adopt resolution number 3059, clarifying the criteria the demographer will consider when preparing draft maps. And this is inclusive of Exhibit A, our criteria to guide the establishment of trustee areas, which is as in print with 3 amendments, which is item number 7, the inclusion of safety considerations, removal of number 8, and the addition of number 11. The boundaries of the trustee area shall include at least 1 high school or more. Questions for staff on capturing all that. We're also on video, so I think we're good. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution with the criteria as amended?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Costa. Is there a second? Sir. Been seconded by Dr. McKibben. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. That was unanimous. We are now at item C2, tentative agreement with the San Juan Professional Educators Coalition. Superintendent Kern.